Kindly silence all mobile devices as the program is about to begin. Please welcome Casey Vanderstricht, Principal, Solve Innovation Future, MIT Solve.
Some applause, and I see folks who aren't even Solve staff applauding. What a great start to a session. It's going to be wonderful. Welcome to day 2. Thank you for joining us. I'm really excited not only to have you here in Cambridge and engaging with the Solve community more broadly, but here to learn a little bit more about Solve Innovation Future. And really what we're focused on today is taking action. And we've got some wonderful guests and experts and innovators who are here to hear from you. We'll have questions and a questions mic where you can come up at any point, but also where we can talk about innovation and where are we succeeding and where are we failing with respect to mobilizing capital to drive true innovation to the folks who need it, who are working to solve the world's most pressing problems. So I'm honored to be here today. I'm here in my role as principal of Solve Innovation Future. What that means is that I run the investment fund associated with MIT Solve. We were structured back in 2019 in direct response from what we heard from our solver teams, which was we need more investment capital to grow and to scale these ideas that are changing the world. So we developed Solve Innovation Future with 3 specific objectives in mind. The first was to disperse catalytic capital and to take risk. So what does that mean? That means we say to entrepreneurs, you tell us what you need and we will structure investment capital that helps you reach your capital raising goals. Part 2, we have a diversified portfolio. Broadly, we understand that talent is not geographically located or limited in any way. Instead, our job is to find entrepreneurs from around the world, broadly mimicking the Solve portfolio and connecting those innovators to capital. We are more than 50% female-led. We invest across the 4 pillars in which Solve works: health, economic prosperity, learning, and sustainability. And we're headquartered, our 19 investments are headquartered in 10 countries. The last piece of our work is potentially the most innovative, and that is our innovative financing and recyclable financing model. We are structured as a donor-advised fund, which means we use philanthropic capital, and we help connect that capital with the teams that need it in a way that works for them. Functionally, because we're using the philanthropic capital, we can take more risk. We can work with teams who are first-time founders, who are serving really hard-to-serve populations, or who are tackling new markets with aplomb. All of the proceeds from our investments go back into the fund and back into future solver teams, so we're really paying it forward and aligning our incentives with our innovators. And to date, specifically, how does it work? The donor lends to Solve Innovation Future, or gives to Solve Innovation Future. Solve Innovation Future makes direct investments, and those proceeds go back in a virtuous cycle. And we're taking action. Since 2020, we have made 19 investments. We have deployed about $2 million and unlocked 4 times that amount in service of our teams. And that number is really important and really important to this broader discussion. We are accountable to introducing, unlocking, and catalyzing funding for our portfolio. This work can't be done unless we continue to take action and we continue to catalyze dollars. And our portfolio has served more than 68 million lives. So I'm really excited to share that with you today and to explore these concepts of scale and action. We've structured the program the next hour or so to feature, as I say, some of these innovators and experts who are doing the work. It's really important that we focus on doing the work and executing. First, we'll focus on folks who are doing the work in markets that maybe are pretty robust or mature but need innovation to better serve. Then we'll focus on serving markets and innovators who have been historically underrepresented in both the venture world and broader markets. And finally, we'll look at how do we take action and drive impact in new and emerging markets, not geographically, but rather from a sector perspective, thinking about climate and big ideas that are going to change the world. So I'm really excited again to have you today. Please, at any moment, if you have questions, do not hesitate to come forward to the microphone. Our moderators will make sure to be on the lookout. And right now, I am honored to welcome our first guest to the stage, Bernard van Lingen. I said it wrong, Lingrich. And in fact, I actually specifically practiced before. So thank you for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
Let's start with just a quick introduction of who you are.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Yep.
I'm Bernhard van Lengerich, and I grew up as an artisan baker, Dad's Bakery, and then moved on to become a food technologist, did my PhD in Berlin on food and biotechnology, and then joined different companies along the food value chain, and ended up as becoming a chief science officer at General Mills 28-ish years ago.
Yeah.
Retired 8 years ago, and founded the Seeding the Future Foundation.
Okay.
And the impetus of founding it leads me to tell you a little story about our first visit in Africa.
Okay.
And so a little bit before my retirement, I joined a team trying to learn the food value chain in sub-Saharan Africa. So we visited Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and we wanted to know how food comes from the farmer to the consumer. And so we visited grocery stores and visited a bunch of farmers. And one farmer we visited, he had a little beehive where he, made honey to sell to get some, income for his family. And he had an extended family of about 25, including, lots of little children. They were malnourished, they were stunted, and they were all happy. And so he was proud showing us his farm. And at the end of the visit, we asked him, if you had one wish, what would it be? And he said, we've got these 2 chickens here who, provide, a couple of eggs a day, and if we would have 2 more chickens for our family, that would be changing our lives. And so that sort of sticks with you.
Yeah.
And then you fly back to Minneapolis. That's where we live, and flight attendants comes and asks you want another meal or so, and so it formed us quite a bit in establishing our Seeding the Future Foundation, which and we have core beliefs where we say nobody should ever be hungry. Chronic hunger is unacceptable, and we feel that everybody should have access to safe and nutritious food. And that is trusted by the consumer, and that is nutritious and doesn't destroy the earth. And so that's where we established our foundation. Future Foundation.
Well, and tell me, backing up a little bit, thinking about your journey in particular, I think what you've hit on is really interesting as we think about taking action and think about learning from what's working and what's not. You worked in sort of a traditional food ecosystem when you were at General Mills.
Yes.
What did you learn during your time there, and how do you pair that with what you see now as the needs based on the solutions you get at Seeding the Future?
So developing healthy food in particular is really not very difficult.
Right.
Developing healthy foods that taste good is more difficult. Most foods that really taste great is not necessarily healthy. Most foods that is really healthy is really not tasting great. So there's some challenge, but most of the entire food world is working on that. Now put on top of it, making healthy food taste good and not destroying the earth or being within planetary boundaries is even more difficult. And then comes the consumer, because the consumer needs to trust it, consumer needs to like it, consumer needs to be able to afford it. And so that's where an innovation white space lies. And we made that innovation white space, we call this white space of food innovation, as a core center point, center focus for a global food system challenge, which we launched a few years ago. So we are awarding $1 million a year for innovations in this white space. And surprisingly, we found out most of the most impactful innovations come from the global south.
Interesting. And 2 points that jump out to me there, this idea of innovation white space. And do we think innovation white space exists? Can we say that by definition, innovation white space in the food system has impact? Or do you think that there are certain pieces of the innovation white space model that require serving certain markets or require thinking about externalities about the food systems that you've developed? How do you think about that innovation white space and impact more broadly?
The impact question is incredibly important, and it's a big criteria for being selected as top 1%, because many people meet this innovation white space. They might meet one or two, but as long as they don't damage the other or undo another, they are in the game in terms of semifinalists, finalists, winners. But the winners are really the ones who meet this white space plus have a substantial impact. Let me give you an example of impact. The first year we had the International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines coming up with a new rice variety that does not pick up arsenic from the groundwater. So you might say, why is that important? Well, there are between 40 and 70 million people at the basin of the Himalaya mountains who are eating rice which is grown with water that is coming from the snowmelt from the Himalaya mountains. Yeah. So you know that the Himalaya that water carries a substantial amount of arsenic into the valley. Yeah. And people who eat that rice, they get diseases, they have acidosis, they die, and having this new rice variety ready to go, germplasm ready to go, ready to commercialize in between 5 and 10 years, affecting 70 million people, that's impact.
Right.
So it's an example of how we assess it, and when we look at impact, we also look at scalability. Right. And so if we have a let's say an accelerated composting mechanism in Nepal, it might not be, it's a big deal for a small community. Yeah. But if we can do this across the world, all of a sudden it becomes a big impact. Right. So scaling not only has to do with going from a lab to a gigantic factory, it's also going from a community to 10 communities to 1,000 communities to millions of communities.
Right. Yeah, I'm struck by the story you shared and the idea of 2 chickens as being scale, and also, and equally in many ways as important as a rice variety that can serve hundreds of millions, and thinking about balancing that within the portfolio. Is that something that you all consider when you're awarding prizes or when you're looking for innovations, that sort of depth versus breadth question?
Absolutely. The sourcing of the innovation is really not relevant to us. It can come from across the value chain. Yep. It can be a crop science innovation. It can be a circular agriculture innovation. Yep. It can be anything across the value chain, but it needs to enable the production of food for this purpose, to have a societal impact, or it has an environmental impact, or both. Yep. And I can give you an example of the first prize in the second year. Was an Institute for the Future in Chicago. It's run by a previous ambassador under the Obama administration, and they are running a project in Rwanda where they take city waste, organic city waste, put a black soldier fly. Black soldier flies basically consuming the waste, laying the larvae. The larvae 200 folds its own weight plus protein. Feed the larvae to chickens. And the chickens provide protein for the population. The unique part of it is that the motivation behind it was corn and soy are unaffordable for chicken feed. They do not want to feed human food to chickens, so they find different ways. So it's a complete circular mechanism. It's being scaled, it's being financed, and it's a great project. It's these kind of initiatives we highly value.
And when we think about that scale and finance question in particular, one of the things that is unique about what you are doing, and I hope we are part of this continuum, is that the prizes to a certain extent are retrofit or available based on the scale or the stage of the entity. Ideally, then someone comes to a funder like SIF who's able to support those teams over time. How do you think about that continuum of capital and where there's both weakness and therefore opportunity, and what we're really good at already? How do you think about that?
When I look at an investment from a private investment, angel investment perspective, or when we looked at investments from a General Mills perspective, we had the 3-on-1 Inc., which is the investment arm of General Mills. We always look at 3 things, and this is generally true in the food space. Can you make it? Can you sell it? Can you make money on it?
That's okay.
Yeah,
It's that
you know,
simple.
the
Yeah.
more you make, the more you lose.
Right.
That's not a viable business model.
Right,
So
right.
it needs to be at least at scale. It
Right.
needs to be visible.
Yep.
You know, if it's not visible in the first year, okay. If it's not visible in 10 years, not okay.
Right.
And so can you make it doesn't mean you can make it in the lab.
Yeah.
Can you make it means you can make it in the lab, in a pilot plant, and you can have a reasonable, believable judgment and analysis how you make it at scale,
Yeah.
technical, economic analysis, etc. So that means you can make it. Can you sell it? It's important because there is a buyer, which is the consumer. So
Right.
many people think about the food value chain from farm to fork, but at the end of the chain is the consumer. So material and energy flow essentially goes from farm to fork.
Right.
Money flow goes in opposite direction.
Yeah.
So if you don't get the consumer buy-in, and we always had a litmus test is, would a mom with 2, 3 children buy this food enabled by this technology? So look 10 years, 15 years back. If you were a crop scientist, you developed a GMO material, you would say, wow, this is really cool.
Right.
Now, if they would have asked the consumer first,
Right.
you know, they would have saved hundreds of millions of dollars in communicating this different or developing something different. So asking the consumer, regardless where people are in the value chain, is important. The first question I would always ask as an investor, did you check with the consumer, how they like your idea?
Yeah.
If the consumer is so-so, if 9 out of 10 tell you, I love it,
Yeah.
I would buy it, keep going.
Okay.
If 9 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 tell you, I don't think it's a good idea. You should rethink what you do. And then can you make money on it? It's probably the less complicated question.
Yeah.
Because if a techno-economic analysis shows that this can be done at a COGS reasonable in a reasonable time period, then an investment would be absolutely game.
Yeah. Do you think, and this is maybe a provocative question, but do you think it's possible, as we think about, for example, a rice product that doesn't absorb arsenic, do you think that's possible to move through, in the food ecosystem in particular, through the scale process to get to, call it a General Mills, while retaining an impact focus? Do you think that's something that we can hope for?
Yes, actually, I like the determination phrase from the previous speaker.
Yeah.
That is something we absolutely can hope for. I mean, the primary focus of this particular project was not to pick up arsenic and other heavy metals from the ground.
Right.
However, what was not, let's say, part of the discussion, which was part of the thinking, is large parts of the food industry are moving away from rice because of the arsenic content.
Interesting.
Large part of the children and baby food manufacturers moving away from rice because of the arsenic content.
Right.
So having a variety that is arsenic-free is a significant breakthrough, not only for the global south, but for the developed world.
Right.
So when we look at innovations from the global south, they might be focused on global south, but we can also think about what we call reverse innovation. So you take an innovation from a developing region and you apply the insight or the basic concept to a developed region. Like take a company in Kenya, it's called Solar Free. So they take solar panels, put them in a container, add a refrigerating unit on it, and rent this out using the Airbnb model to farmers.
Yeah.
So farmers have normally between 40 and 80% post-harvest losses.
Yeah.
Mango, perishable goods, they have enough of it, but it goes bad in a few days.
Right.
So having this model provides food, reduces waste, and provides income.
Yeah.
And so why not having, this might be a little, left field, but why not having a vertical greenhouse next to each pharmacy in the United States, or particularly in food deserts, where, using a similar model. So there are many cases where we could take a look at, reverse innovation, and then invest in those.
Right, right. And I think that's intersectionality is a nice moment to maybe take a question from the crowd, and we would love to hear from you. If you don't mind introducing yourself, feel free to share your question.
Thank you. My name is Larry Susskind. I'm on the faculty at MIT, a professor in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. I'm part of the new field called Public Interest Technology, PIT. MIT is one of 66 schools that joined a consortium in the United States of schools committed to developing public interest technology. I very much appreciate the clarity of the presentation that you've made. Questions help to be very clear what the model is. Let me ask whether you considered the possibility of guaranteeing that the prize winners and the technology they're implementing shares the profit that is made by the technology owners with the communities that are using the technology, whose problem, whose interests keyed the making of the version of the technology that you're supporting. We have many examples in the US of Native American communities, tribes, where energy companies are developing renewable energy on tribal land. There's a law in the US that the developer consult with that community, but that's it. And we have instances in which those renewable energy projects are built and the electricity generated from them goes on wires over the tribal land where they're located at no payment to the community, but to the federal agency. And they don't have any more electricity than they had before. If you were to require that the public interest be served by the advances in technology application that you're supporting, you could require that a percentage ownership of the innovation that's being tested be owned by the community.
It's a really interesting question. Do you have any thoughts on it? Food in particular is such an interesting intersectionality between.
I must admit, I misunderstood one word at the early part of the question.
Yes.
So I understand the conflicting situation.
Yep. I think the question, as I understood it, was: do you ever consider, as you find technologies all over the world and fund those technologies, is there some way that your prize winners might structure their financial stacks such that the community was engaged, had some sort of equity in the company itself?
The grants which we give are non-dilutive, and they submit a budget to the selection committee.
Right.
And if the budget suggests that the community is part of the equity of the social enterprise, there's nothing from a foundation perspective which would prevent that.
Right.
Absolutely. So.
Well, and that's, I think, a perfect place for us to pause and celebrate the importance of philanthropy as a part of this broader ecosystem, and how the risk-tolerant nature and non-dilutive nature of the work that you're doing within this mature ecosystem, right? We have a food ecosystem, is really important to give time and space to new ideas.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't have a vote in the selection committee. I pull myself out, of course, and I even don't ask a question because that might be very manipulative. Okay. But I can hear sometimes the struggle they have with really, really great ideas from for-profit companies in the developed region. Where there's a potential investor base behind them. Right. And then there's another idea which is, from an innovative and novelty perspective, as good, impact, and they always move towards the other side because they say the catalytical effect of the money on the community, on the social impact is really, really important. And so it's a big factor. Included in that is involving ownership from communities. Right. Absolutely.
Well, you have done my job for me, because our next speakers will touch on some of these ideas about how do you fund innovators where there aren't necessarily philanthropists and funders who are behind them to scale some of these ideas. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today. I love hearing about innovation and thinking about innovating within spaces that exist, and hearing about your work is really inspiring. So thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm going this way.
We'll go this way.
And now, please welcome Amber Bucher, founder and CEO, Totem, and Jim Castleberry, CEO and co-founder, Known Holdings.
Well,
Hey, Jim.
Good morning, Amber. How are you? It's so good to
Doing really
meet
well.
you. Have we ever met before?
Just a little bit. Just a little bit. I'm excited to chat with you today in front of all of our friends.
Yeah, you know, this is always part of the good thing and the problem is that in these types of environments, we seem to be talking to the choir, right? But with us having the diversity of relationships, both academics, funders, innovators, solvers, all in the same room, you know, for us to be able to be aligned on how we do this and how we move forward. Why don't we start off with you sharing what you do at Totem and what have been some of your experiences in getting started and raising all of the chaos that is going on in our marketplace right now. So
Yeah.
how it's impacted you.
Well, I love to start out, if you don't mind indulging me in my native language. Halito sa hochifo ya Amber Bucher chatasia hoki Tulsa amitili. Hello, my name is Amber Bucher. I am Choctaw. I am from Tulsa. And I like to start that way, not to like brag. I am not a good native speaker. I'm just learning. But we believe in our indigenous communities that a lot of people believe that when you speak our language, you breathe life into it. And so I just like to start that way and like, breathe life into this conversation too. So a little bit about my background. I am Choctaw, as I mentioned. I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma. I lived most of my life there. And it's a really special place to grow up because there are 39 different federally recognized tribes based there, and over half of the state is reservation land. So I grew up in a place where it was not uncommon to drive into a parking lot and see more car tags from a native nation than my state. So it was a really special place to grow up in terms of being indigenous, but then as I entered into my entrepreneurial journey, and actually just my work journey, just going to law school and moving around the country, I began to see that it wasn't that way in other places, and certainly not in the financial space that I kind of fell into a career in. I had some personal experiences trying to tackle finances as an indigenous person that were really difficult, and that was the path that led me to found Totem, which is the only digital bank by and for indigenous people. So we're trying to help more of our people get banked, and we're partnering with tribes to help them disperse cash benefits and payroll to citizens of their nations and employees. And so we're doing that to get more of our people banked. Natives are the largest group of unbanked people in the country. And being that that's what I do, it's this really weird connection between fintech and tech in this very like sexy, fast-moving world, but also working with tribes and indigenous communities and very underserved people, very impoverished people typically, if you look at the statistics. And it's really difficult to marry those two when you're trying to go out and fund a company because it's like, well, who do I talk to, right? I had so many calls with sort of institutional VC, more tech-focused folks that kind of understood the model but didn't understand my market. They didn't understand my market, right? Mm-hmm. They would have a lot of like pity calls where they would like, I would get in the door with a big VC fund and they would have the call and it would be great and they'd be so supportive, and then at the end they would always look at me and say, we're really glad you're doing this, but we just don't know anything about it. Sorry. Put us on your investor updates. You're welcome. I will do that so that you can say you're on my investor updates. And it was just really difficult to go out and have those conversations over and over and over again until I found my way into impact investing. And that truly changed the game. So I was introduced by another indigenous woman to a group called Raven Indigenous Capital Partners. As the name implies, they are indigenous. They are primarily in Canada, but are deploying a lot of capital in the US now, more and more. And when I talked to them about what I was doing, they immediately understood it, because this world of tribal economic development and sovereignty was not unknown to them. It was not scary to them.
Sure.
they were able to look past that and see the economic opportunity that others couldn't. And that was really cool because they're indigenous, so they totally get it. But the same is true of other impact investors, because what I found is that they are willing to go out and do the legwork, right? Those other institutional VCs where I was just like, great, we've got an indigenous woman in the pipeline, yeah. That was very different than the people that genuinely wanted to solve our problem. It felt different, and they were willing to, Norbert is in the audience here somewhere today. He's with Good Chaos, and he's not even from the US, but he was on the phone to the secretary of the Muskogee Creek Nation, learning about their really interesting governmental structure, learning about what challenges they're facing in finance, and all of these different things to put in the work to truly understand the opportunity. And I think that's where impact investing is so important. And then something that was surprising on the journey was really just the thing that I want to leave with the entrepreneurs in the audience is just the importance of conversations. So even the ones that were using me to check the box, there's always an opportunity there to ask for another intro, ask if they know someone else who does do this work. Oftentimes they'll know someone in impact investing or philanthropy who would be interested. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll wrap up and let you take us wherever else we need to go, is just the importance of being people with people. So it's very easy, especially in a funder and fundee situation, to get locked into those traditional roles that put the entrepreneur oftentimes on the back foot, to be candid, especially if they're an underserved group or a first-time entrepreneur like myself. And I think the way that we can prevent that from happening is just by building good relationship in the first place. So, we know each other because the known holdings, but known, brought me as a part of the Indigenous delegation to an incredible event called SoCap, which a lot of you would probably enjoy. And one of the things that they do there that's so cool is they talk about, when you're meeting someone, they don't want you to talk about, I'm from the Kellogg Foundation. They want you to talk about what you're passionate about and what you're interested in and what sparks you. And so I'd say that's really where I found common ground from investors right off the bat, and then you can kind of ease into bringing them into your world.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, Amber, you hit on so many of the aspects of what people that are outside of the nomenclature of investments, of asset allocation, of what we have to go through to be able to normalize the process for others to be able to find us. And one of the things that's one of the reasons that I started Known was, having come out of 40 years of experience in that nomenclature, I know that it doesn't work to be able to discover and find different. Some of the speakers yesterday had talked about we can't use the same tools, we can't use the same processes, but at the same time, there's some of them that we have to be able to utilize, that we have to be able to bring together to be able to move it forward, and then, developing the ability to be able to know that difference, to know where we need to insert, that there's talent, there's opportunity with indigenous populations, within black and brown populations, that we have to then understand that the historical gates that have been put in place that have kept us from doing that. One of the things that I'd like you to share quickly is in the relationships and in the network, and I think that there's somebody that we are both kind of involved with, how did that investment come to be?
All of our investors came from just having conversation after conversation, and it's the same way that we built the product, to be candid. We spent a long time just talking to Native folks before we ever even thought about raising money to see if this was something that was important, right, to our people and it needed. Those conversations led, you know how it goes. This is like the thing that I preach on all the time, conversations, just keep talking to people, because that one leads to the next, to the next, to the next. So obviously, and you guys are all familiar with this, once you have that lead investor in the door, also those conversations get a lot easier. They're sharing diligence, they're using their networks with other investors. If you've got a good one, like I did, they're making your job as a founder easier by leveraging their own networks. And so I think that that's just really can't be understated how important events like this are for all of you to be in the same room and sharing deal flow and knowing what each other's missions are, so that you can pass people like me along when it's like, oh no, we don't do that, but Raven would be perfect for you. I think that's so important. And I would say too, like, again, just going back to being people, like our first ever tribal partner that we worked with, it's really difficult to work in Indian country, really difficult to work with tribes. A lot of investors asked us, like, how are you even gonna get into this? How are you even gonna break into this market? Like, you're selling into government and it's tribal government? That sounds like the slowest thing ever. But just by being authentic, we met our first tribal partner. I was at a dinner, he gets introduced as the treasurer of such and such nation, and we just had a good time at the dinner and became friends, and later on we met for coffee, he loved the mission, whatever, but he told me months and months later, after we had signed an agreement with his nation, the reason why I wanted to work with you and learn more was because you didn't pitch me.
Right.
You didn't pitch me at dinner. Everyone else, as soon as they hear my title, they go into pitch mode.
Right.
That's the last thing you want to do, guys. If you can find common ground as people, that's the best place to start.
One of the themes for this conference overall and the event overall is what actions can we take? And when I say we, you, me, and also those that have those relationships of influence or sit with allocators, what are the actions that you feel like they can do, that they can move forward with?
Go meet your local tribal nations. Please. You are on native land. I guarantee it. No matter where you are, you're on it or you're near it, right? I can't overstate how important it is to meet your local tribal leaders, because not only do they have vast amounts of ancient wisdom that you may not be tapping into, that is local ancient wisdom typically, that is really crucial for a lot of people that are into agriculture, climate, right? But they also have robust economic development engines that are working in many of these nations, and it goes way beyond gaming. People automatically think of casinos, but tribes are doing an enormous amount of work in everything from plastic manufacturing to drones. The enterprises that these tribal nations have are vast, and so truly as a business leader, you are missing out. It would be like if you had the CEO of Walmart in your town and you never went and tried to set up a meeting with their team. So that's what it is, in my opinion, at least. So.
Well, one of the things, and again, sometimes I try to not get up on my soapbox, but
it's hard when you're on a literal stage.
I'm going to go ahead and hop on. One of the things that we tend to forget, and with you mentioning that we're on indigenous land, if we acknowledge that the United States economy was developed on free IP, free land, free labor, and that the wealth that's created, which now is over the next 30 years, we're going to transfer about $91 trillion of wealth that was created out of the foundation of a market that was based on the non-philanthropic contribution from indigenous and enslaved people.
That non-philanthropic, that's a lovely way to say things.
I'm trying to be kind. And I think that what we have to do is part of what we have to do, and actionable, is look at the different ways of being able to make those allocations and look at our capital stack differently. because everybody wants to say, oh, it's a concessionary return, oh, it's this. But if we think about how much of our economy and how much of our opportunity has been created by doing research and development, by doing things that were not intended to create a financial return, but things that were created to produce an outcome. And so that's part of what I think that we can push with, and to try to lower the obstacles of as we move from philanthropic to impact to market to buyout to across that whole chasm, to be able to think about it instead of in separate pools, in a aligned pool to, at the end of the day, both have financial returns, but also have high utility of those returns and the impact within the communities, societies that they exist.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the only way to do it. I don't think there's anything concessionary at all about backing an indigenous company for indigenous people if I can get it to profitability within 3 years of launching, right? I mean, our model is built on payments. It is like, I mean, it's a good business to be in. Let's just say that. So what we did is we looked at the landscape, and it's really interesting in the space that we're in, digital banking, which I'll just touch on briefly. What we saw in COVID was really interesting because we needed to get a ton of money out to people very quickly. And if people didn't have a bank account, all the banks were closed. So what do? You have to sign up for an online account if you're not already banked. So we had a huge wave of people that all of a sudden got banked because of these digital accounts. With that, we saw a lot of digital banks pop up for all of these different groups. Black Americans, Asian Americans, immigrants, LGBTQIA folks, I mean, just every group that you can think of was trying to do niche banking for their community, which is noble. However, the model is wrong. Because what you're doing is you're saying, we're going to take this model that works for Chime when you have 1 million people and massive scale and interchange, and we're going to try to offer that to a much smaller percentage of the population using the same model. It just doesn't work. So what do? Well, you could just not serve those people at all. That would be a travesty, or you can get creative. So what we did in our case was we looked at our community and we said, okay, we want to be able to get people banked. What does that mean? That means no fees, no overdrafts, safe, simple, straightforward accounts. If we can, we'd love to be able to send money back and forth like Venmo, right? How do we do that in a way that is profitable, like 10x profitable, just like every other VC expects? Just because your impact doesn't mean you don't need a return, right? So we said, well, let's look at the actual communities we're trying to serve. Oh, well, they have tribes, literal governments that are passing out programs, funding, all of these things that no one is serving directly. And that is a commercial product that can essentially subsidize our ability to provide those accounts to tribal members. The tribe wants it, it's good for them, it's good for us, and that's what you should be looking at as an impact investor, is not concessionary in any way, but how can I look at this problem through the lived experience lens in order to create a real scalable solution?
By the end user. I see, we have one question.
We've got a question already lined up, yeah.
I do, thank you. My name is Sergio Figueroa. I come from the world of project finance. I've been doing about 25 years or so of investing in infrastructure, energy assets globally. And I'm very curious about the point around profitability that we're making specifically in indigenous nations in the US. And bear with me, I'm coming also from a lens of investing in Latin America and coming to my surprise, starting to focus in the US about 3-4 years ago, that projects in indigenous communities in the US face a lot of problems similar to what I find in some Latin American countries, specifically with regards to what people would call sovereign type risk, right? Country type risk of sorts. A bunch of projects that have come across my desk failed to find financing precisely because of a perceived risk about what if that specific government, which is technically under US law, quasi-sovereign, decides to change things. So how can I invest over a 10, 20-year period for a solar generation farm? A gentleman earlier made an example out of that.
Right.
Do you find that becoming a limiting factor to what you're doing specifically with your company and attracting capital? And do you see that as systematically problematic for scaling issues, solutions to the issues that you're trying to tackle more broadly?
I'll take the first part, but then I want to throw it to you for the broader issue. I mean, for me, I am a Delaware C Corp public benefit corporation. So dealing with me is no different than dealing with any other fintech that a VC would want to fund. We are not tribally owned. I'm a tribal member, but that has no bearing on our actual, like, we're not incorporated on a tribal nation. Now, I as a business do carry some risk in contracting with a sovereign tribal government, but we just contract around those, right? Things get built all the time with tribal nations. But that's where I'd like to throw it to you, actually, because you're doing much bigger deals. So what does that look like for you?
Well, no, I think that's part of, there had never been created kind of the black, brown, indigenous equivalent of a mothership like a Goldman Sachs or like of a Morgan Stanley or JP Morgan, and which would be able to navigate those types of issues and manage for that level of risk. So that's what we're trying to do, so that we're able to execute not only domestically but regionally, and because we're going to need to be in South America, we're going to need to be in Central America, we're going to need to be in the continent at some point. So to be able to navigate those differences with sovereign entities and the issues and the geopolitical changes that we're going to encounter, we have to almost anticipate and expect those. And then how do we pivot and how do you navigate? So that's how we're approaching it and looking at it, to be able to be part of that ecosystem. And we'll take one more. One more? Nope. Cut?
Nope, we're cut off, sorry.
Sorry.
You can find me after, I'm around. Come to my brain trust.
I think we're doing a little networking afterwards, but we're going to go.
We're going to go. Thank you, everyone.
Please welcome Tim Krissick, Managing Partner, Mass Mutual Climate Ventures, and Laura Metcalf, Managing Director, Draper Richards Kaplan Foundation.
Thank you. It's great to be here with all of you at Solve, my first time. And now we're going to speak about climate solutions.
And you've got it all figured out, right?
I've got it all figured out, but would love to hear what the audience thinks. No, in all seriousness, it's an incredibly important and timely problem, and we're eager to hear from the audience what you're working on, how we can help. So let's make this as interactive as possible. I think our job now is to tell you a bit about what we're doing in the space, how we're investing, how we think about the market. And so with that, Laura, I'll ask you what your thesis is on the space and how you're working the climate issue.
Great. Well, so happy to be here, and really honored to be in a community of people like all of you in the audience that are spending every day trying to solve these really big problems facing our world. And it gives me hope when I get anxious and when the world feels like it's a little bit on fire. I just look at all the social entrepreneurs out there, trying to solve these big problems. So thank you. My name's Laura Metcalf. I'm a senior managing director at Draper Richards Kaplan Foundation, DRK. We're a venture philanthropy organization, much like Casey was describing, that MIT Solve has set up in the last few years. I actually sit on that investment committee as well. But DRK, for the last 22 years, has been looking for social entrepreneurs globally that are tackling some of the world's most pressing problems, whether it's in health, education, climate, agriculture. In the US, we do some democracy work, local journalism, et cetera. Today, we'll talk about the climate work, obviously. And I just think it's important to understand about DRK that our true north is really looking at the intersection of all of those issues I just named and vulnerable populations. I don't think I'm saying anything surprising when I say that as climate change hits, it's the most vulnerable populations that are going to bear the worst brunt of what's coming. And so we're really invested in trying to figure out how to mitigate those challenges for folks globally. About 50% of what we do is in the global south. We've been investing in Africa and India for the entirety of our existence. And so excited to talk a little bit more about some of what we've done there. But first, I'd love to hear a little bit more from you, Tim, on what you're working on.
Yeah, so about a year ago, I joined MassMutual Ventures. So I'm the managing partner of the Climate Technology Fund. And MassMutual has been doing direct venture investing for over a decade now, with over $1 billion committed to venture capital strategies. In late 2022, MassMutual Ventures announced the creation of a new fund, a climate-specific fund, and as I said, early 2023, I joined to co-lead that fund. So we're a financial investor, so we seek competitive financial returns relative to our asset class, and climate is so big, it's so broad. We have a $150 million early stage fund, and so we're focused on, we call them 3 swim lanes within climate. So first, we think a lot about what we call climate intelligence companies that are leveraging big data on the natural world, on markets, and turning it into solutions to help address the climate crisis. Second, we think about a lot of time thinking about sustainable cities. Decarbonizing the built environment is so important. 30% of energy, 30% of carbon emissions roughly. That's a challenge that we have to tackle, and I think it's one that's coming into focus as regulation steps up. Local Law 97 in New York and similar laws throughout the country. There's going to be more and more focus on reporting and reducing emissions in the built environment. And then we want to be mindful of all of the climate issues, whether it's circular economy, urban EV charging. There's so much to do within cities, and we're still urbanizing as a globe. So solving those urban climate challenges, critically important. And then the third area that we focus on is clean power. So both new ways to generate power, more efficient ways to get it to people. That transmission and distribution bottleneck is real. It's slowing progress on decarbonizing the grid. And there's also a suite of technologies and business models around about electrifying demand. We can't forget about the demand side part of the equation. So those are the 3 areas where we spend most of our time.
And would you consider yourself kind of a hard tech or deep tech investor, or what's your split between hardware and software?
So I'm glad you asked. I think it's hard to be in climate tech without doing hardware. So we focus on both software and hardware, but mindful that there are a lot of business models in between. There's a lot of hybrid models out there, hardware-enabled software, certain marketplace models. I mean, there's a lot that can be done between those 2 poles.
I'm glad you said that, because I was just about to say there are lots of ways to do climate tech investing. Yep. And our way at DRK is very different, actually, and important. And I think when Tim and I were talking before, we realized what both of us is doing is important, and actually we need more people on both ends. What I mean by that is DRK is really, we're not investing in deep tech or frontier tech. We are not taking technology risk. What we're trying to do, though, often is taking well-known, well-understood, established technologies and bringing them into communities, or to help solve problems that these vulnerable communities globally are facing. And really, for us, we think about it more as implementation risk. So whether it's trying to solve energy poverty in Africa, we have organizations like Solar Sisters, who's been around for more than 10 years. They have 10,000 female entrepreneur, basically Avon ladies for solar products in rural Africa, and their products have touched 4 million people over the last 10 years. Or it could be including low-income communities in the energy transition here in the US, where right now we're about to make an investment in an organization that has figured out how to let renters in multifamily and affordable housing get the benefits of cheaper solar energy to reduce their utility bills. There's a mismatch. I call it a wrong pockets problem. The landlord doesn't want to spend the money to upgrade to these solar systems if they're not going to get the benefit. You had a better name for it. What do you call it?
Incentives.
Yeah, right, the
We just call it
mismatch.
the incentives, or the split incentives,
The
probably.
split
yeah.
incentives problem, right. So the split incentive, so organizations like that, or it could be just last mile access of different sorts. We also are doing some nature-based solutions. We're working with fisher folk to try to make sure that they can maintain their livelihoods as temperatures warm. Keep It Cool is an organization we've done work with in Africa that provides coal storage and transportation. So I guess my thought would be, we need folks like you spending money on this really critical, innovative sequestration, et cetera. And you need folks like us who are going to make sure that every single person on this planet benefits from the technology we have and avoids the worst harm that's coming with climate change.
So I'm curious, take me inside your investment committee, inside your IC. Within your thesis, you're dealing with a variety of different cases. How do you measure the ecological impact, the social impact? What are the metrics or the tools that you use to quantify that impact when you make a decision?
That's such a good question. Because we are investing across so many issue areas, we made a decision long ago that we would measure total lives impacted as the single metric we report on, but we really encourage our portfolio to report on kind of standard, recognized, research-based metrics. And so, for DRK as a whole, we've touched 400, we've had a direct impact on 400 million lives over the last 22 years. And I shouldn't say, I don't claim that impact. Our portfolio has touched that many people. In the climate space, our numbers are much smaller because we're newer in climate. We've had impact on 30 million lives over the last 7 or 8 years and removed 15 metric tons of carbon, or, through the portfolio.
That's great.
But it's, for us as a venture philanthropy organization, absolutely impact is often the first thing we talk about. Is it a big enough problem? Is it a vulnerable population? And is this solution innovative? And can it scale? Because the DRK model is one of a small cash investment, 3 years of a board member. So we take a board seat in every single situation. We act as an operating partner, so right there in the trenches, weekly, bi-weekly calls with the CEO helping solve things. And then a community of 240 amazing entrepreneurs, some of whom are here today, which is wonderful to see. MIT Solve has been a great partner.
That's great.
So I'd love to hear a little bit more, like, what are the biggest challenges you face when you're trying to, go after whatever's going to be the most, highest commercial return, but also best impact on climate?
Yeah, there are so many challenges. I mean, first and foremost, we look for founders who are really always in learning mode. They want to make the most of their board. They want to make the most of their investor community. That's really important to us, to find those curious, nimble founders who see the problem, who can describe the problem clearly, and work from that basis. We think back to the hardware-software dichotomy. I think recognizing there's a lot in between, but I think with software-focused companies, we're trying to help them on that journey from the first $1 million of recurring revenue to $5 million of recurring revenue, right? With the hardware companies, I think it's more we're taking them from late bench stage science or perhaps early commercial deployments. We'll say we'll go pre-revenue on the hardware side, but not pre-product. We do like to see at least a pilot project out there collecting real-world data. On the hardware side, we try to take the companies from that stage through a thoughtful IP strategy development, thinking about the optimal use of patents and know-how, and approaching that contract manufacturing stage as they start to scale up commercially. And one of the exciting things about the MassMutual platform, very large asset manager and financial organization, of course, but one of the challenges, I think, for climate tech entrepreneurs is finding that full climate capital stack, right?
Absolutely.
Marrying non-dilutive funding, which is so important and a great proof point when you approach financial investors, with early stage venture and then growth, and in some cases, especially on the hardware side, infrastructure debt, appropriate use of venture debt, perhaps equipment-based lending facilities. There's so many things to take advantage of. Fortunately, within MassMutual and Barings, our wholly owned subsidiary, there are a lot of asset managers that have a piece of their strategy that's focused around sustainability or net zero, and they have those different flavors of capital to help entrepreneurs as they scale. So we hope we're the first check, but hopefully not the last check, as we could introduce entrepreneurs to that ecosystem.
That's really great. And I want to ask you another quick question, but I also want to encourage the audience. In a couple minutes, we are going to open it up if people have questions. And so I feel like we just heard you can be pre-revenue, not pre-product. So I feel like that's a rare breed.
Yep.
So, but if you have questions about anything, in the foundation, venture philanthropy, VC world, please get them ready. And I guess do you think any of your organizations will end up, or your companies will end up needing project finance?
Oh, I think certainly. So this fund's a bit early. We launched last year, or closed the fund last year. But certainly in my previous fund at Equinor Ventures, we had multiple companies that were trying to take advantage of project finance because they were dealing with that first-of-a-kind project issue, right? You've got a new electrolyzer. You're building a fusion project for the first time. Like, what is the optimal way to finance that? How do you blend those different types of finance? And I think, putting myself in the entrepreneur's shoes for a minute, what sort of business development negotiation do I have to make with counterparties who might be willing to take some equity exposure, but also are interested in project level risk? So I think there's definitely a place for it in the hard tech, deep tech climate space.
Absolutely. Do you want to spend a moment talking about opportunities? We can both chime in.
Yeah.
I'm happy to have you start about
Sure.
what are you excited about?
Well, there's so many things to get excited about. I think one area that we've got to take really seriously, and it's at the top of the hype curve right now, data centers, emission from data centers.
Totally.
The growth of AI is going to be a profound climate challenge. If you look at some of the studies around the energy consumption and therefore the carbon emissions, the GHG emissions attributable to the growth of data centers, at the same time, AI could be such a powerful tool to help us identify new climate solutions. One that I see a lot of buzz about is the optimal matching for battery chemistry problems, really designing the next level of batteries. You see a bit of that in terms of material science for low carbon or sustainable building products. So there's so much on both sides of the coin. The other area that I think we cannot focus on enough is the area around HVAC and air purification. I mean, if you were in the Northeast last summer, I'll never forget, I was in Brooklyn on the day when the Canadian wildfires reached their peak. The sky was orange. It was a struggle to breathe. And for those of you who have worked in emerging economies, that's probably not the first time that you've had that sensation. So I think the cognitive limits that humans experience when you get over 600 parts per million, that's real, and that's going to be an increasing issue for commercial real estate. For anybody who's worried about managing their energy efficiency footprint within a building, HVAC is always number one on the tornado chart. So those are two areas where we need lots of innovation.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I mean, we are seeing AI in climate in some of our portfolio as well. We invested in a company called Cloud to Street, now known as Floodbase, that's using satellite imagery in low resource areas as a facilitation for those people to be able to buy parametric insurance, which people might know about. But on top of the satellite imagery, they're using AI to kind of really be able to focus down more and make uninsurable places insurable. So I think we are seeing it, and we'll see more of it. But you're right; it's this I wish crypto never happened because that uses so much data too. And
I think it's funny you brought up climate insurance before I did. So to be clear, MassMutual focuses on life insurance, but I agree wholeheartedly. There are so many problems to solve with respect to climate insurance. Obviously, the physical risk, but also the transition risk in the sense that there are all these new products to insure. Right. So what is the business interruption risks, or what is the commercial insurance solution for first of a kind infrastructure?
Right. Totally. I think another area I'm really excited about is the overlap between workforce and the energy transition and green jobs. And I think we're seeing more and more there because if you're talking about any coastal area, we're going to see the removal of impermeable landscapes, right? We have to make significant changes in landscapes, in building, in the built environment, and so I think we're really excited as we start to see more and more of the kind of green job corps types of interventions, and really think there'll be some great opportunities there as well. Now, I can't see if there's anybody in line. I don't think there is. Oh, wait.
Right.
I'd invite you to introduce yourself and ask a question that ends with a question mark.
That sounds good. My name is Sergio Figueroa. Thank you very much for the conversation. I guess like you, I'm very involved in the project finance space. I'm part of the First Citizens Bank team, Silicon Valley Bank team, been doing this for 25 years. I'm really curious about, you were hitting on the thesis, and very interesting on hearing your thoughts around complementarity between software and hardware. And as we know, the U.S. is becoming more and more inward-looking with regards to trade policy, and part of the growth that has happened over the last several years, couple of decades, one could argue, with regards to facilitating cost decrease at an accelerated pace for mostly climate tech solutions, has been driven by having the ability to interact with countries like China, some other manufacturing centers. What's your institutional view of that? Because I'm sure that part of how you're thinking about where you're deploying capital has a lot to do with how you assume the cost curve will look like and its ability to scale accordingly. Just very interesting in hearing your thoughts institutionally, how you're tackling that. Thank you.
Yes. So if I understood the question correctly, what's the interplay between trade policy and the loop of importing finished products from China, installing them in the U.S. to further the energy transition?
Correct.
Yeah. Lots I could say on that. I think one of the areas that we're thinking about is with respect to soft costs in solar and infrastructure development, right? So the new announcements that were made around the Biden administration's decision to extend some of the Trump era tariffs on solar. We think about that a lot. What is that going to mean for the soft costs of implementing these projects? One of the areas that we see is really critical to solve that is, I mentioned the transmission and distribution bottlenecks, right? There's a whole movement toward reconductoring to making the existing grid corridors more efficient. The other issue is a very local issue, and that comes down to permitting at a local level. So we've seen a cluster of companies using large language models to try to enhance permitting efforts, to expedite those permitting efforts so that we can get the green grid faster. With respect to the trade balance, I'd have to think a little bit more about that, but of course one of the things that we always watch closely, because it flows through certainly the mobility sector and also parts of the power sector, is the cost of storage, right? How is that going to be impacted? How soon can the US gigafactories get up and running? Or are we going to see a bit of an air pocket as we transition the supply?
So I encourage you to find him later and ask more.
I'll be at lunch.
I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. My name is Stephanie Joseph, and I'm the co-founder of Cura. We are a blockchain-based fintech accelerating financial inclusion in the global south. Larry mentioned that you're not really focusing on deep tech, but you're focusing on mostly established technologies that can accelerate like climate change in different markets. So for example, what is your recommendation for early stage founders that are building, let's say, blockchain-based solution for climate and insurance and markets that have been deemed a little bit riskier? What metrics are you looking to see? Because there's going to be maybe a long life cycle rather in terms of like implementing blockchain-based insurance, for example, in places like the Caribbean. What metrics would you look at for early stage founders that are building in the space?
Quickly, I guess a couple things that come to mind is kind of knowing exactly who your target market is, what the problem you're trying to solve, what's the value you're going to bring. I will admit with any blockchain-based solution, I always want to understand, is the blockchain really critical to the impact we're trying to have here, or to the value of the product. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. I'll be honest with what we see, because again, blockchain has significant energy costs. So I think it's great for some problems, but we want to make sure that the solution meets the problem. I'm happy to talk to you more afterwards if you want, because I think we're receiving the wind it down, dimming of the lights. So I'm going to say, will you join me in thanking Tim for sharing all of his insights today?
Yeah, and the same to you. Thank you.
All right.
Please welcome back to the stage Casey Vanderstricht, Principal, Solve Innovation Future, MIT Solve.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for this session. I don't know if you heard the thunder outside, but you are safe and dry in here. So I will encourage you to meet and chat with some of the folks who are on stage, and maybe turn to your left and your right and say hello to the person who's beside you, because you are in this room because you care about entrepreneurship, you care about moving capital to the innovators and the ideas that are going to solve the world's most pressing problems, and we are glad that you're here. I am honored to close out the session with an announcement on behalf of Solve Innovation Future. You got to meet Amber a few minutes ago, and Solve Innovation Future executed an investment in Amber just a few months ago, and we are proud to be a part of her cap table and proud to help her make more connections to grow her impact and scale over time. So round of applause for Amber and the success that she's having. We are so grateful to be on her team. With that, a call to action. If you liked what you heard, we'd love to share more about Solve Innovation Future with you. We want to partner with you. We want to learn from you. We want to work with you to support innovators. If you want to donate, you can reach out to me or Frances Robinson. If you want to partner to get to know our solver teams, you can reach out to us as well. And if you want to connect to any of our speakers, we would be thrilled to make those connections. They will also be available in the lobby and out at the tenant lunch to get to meet some of those folks. So thank you again for coming today. We are so honored that you shared some of your day with us, and we look forward to continuing the conversation and driving impact and taking action. Thank you so much. Enjoy lunch.